Hello, everyone. My name is Immo Landberg. You can find me on Twitter at TerraJobs. So today I have a live stream that is a bit out of the ordinary. Normally I stream API reviews pretty much every Tuesday, sometimes even every Thursday now because we apparently have a growing backlog. But in the last API review, we reviewed System.CommandLine, and it was very clear, like, an hour in, that most of the people who are on the review board have never used it, and it's a fairly sizable API, so we said it might be worthwhile just sitting down and actually playing with it. I'm proud of myself. I resisted the temptation to play on this on the weekend, so we actually have a somewhat authentic look today for somebody who's using it for the very first time, or somewhat for the first time. And so today with me is John. John, do you want to introduce yourself? What you do?
Yeah, I'm John Sakura. I'm the engineering lead for the .NET Interactive and Try.NET products, which is interactive programming for .NET, multiple languages and notebooks. And along with a few other people who think that command line tooling in .NET needed a little bit of love, we've been working on the System Command Line project as a bit of a side project with a lot of community support for the last few years. And we're getting close to where we think it's ready to pull the beta tag off of it. And so there's kind of a flurry of new activity, getting people to try to take a look at it and kick the tires and say bad things about the APIs whenever there's something that needs improvement. So
I would never be accused of saying something bad about APIs.
APIs don't have feelings. So
that's true. Yeah, otherwise I would be already on the hit list of some APIs probably. All right, so I open up Visual Studio here. So let me actually switch the screens here if I can figure out how to do this. I think this is the view we want. Yeah, if the font size is too small in chat, let us know. Also, we usually don't stream via Twitch. I mean, I've done this years ago, so I try to pay attention to chat, but be patient. We try to answer your questions and try to make the stream interesting. So basically in the next 2 hours, what we're going to do is I'm going to write a console app. I already created the project, but the project doesn't do anything. And then John will help me to actually put System Command Line to good use. And then we see how we like that, or how I like that, I guess. I mean, John obviously likes it because he wrote it. I would assume he likes it.
Then you can be a pretty harsh critic of your own stuff.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah, I'll take credit for all the mistakes. And community and other people who have helped that have done beautiful work here.
Yeah, this reminds me of the... who was this? It was one guy from Wintellect. I think it was the debugger guy whose name I can't recall right now. He always had the disclaimer at the top of his source files that said, like, if this works, I wrote it. If it doesn't work, I don't know who wrote it. All right, so let's do this. So what I would like to do, I mean, usually this is my problem, right? The command line starts with, here's a bunch of string arguments, and then, happy parsing, right? But I think what I would like to start with is something like, I want something like force, obviously, which is either specified or not specified. I probably want something like an alias for that. I probably want some input files, right? Let's say one to many. And then I think I would like to see some help, I think, as a starting point. So what do I have to do to get there?
Well, the first thing that you would typically start with is a root command. Root command is the most common.
Well, first I guess we have to install it, right?
Yeah.
To do anything useful. So let me actually go to. Well, hold on. I think we need to restart this thing here because apparently it doesn't pick up the NuGet.config that we just created.
Okay.
Let's try this one more time. Manage NuGet packages.
We're going to use okay. I'm going to put the link for this feed into the chat because the API is still changing. The version that's on NuGet.org will be a little bit behind the one that we're going to use today.
So I probably need just System Command Line for now, right?
Yep. Yeah, that's the only one that we're going to look at. The other ones here, like we might want to talk about naming convention binder at some point. And Dragonfruit is interesting. But System Command Line is the one that we're talking about pulling a beta tag off of. The other ones, we're not there yet. So System Command Line contains the core parser bits.
Your comment was flagged by the moderator, by the way.
Well, it says it's being checked. Does that mean it's?
Yeah, it just pops up for me, but like the reason is funny. It says race, ethnicity, or religion. I don't know what part of your URL triggered that part, but I think I'll allow it.
Okay.
This is where we play the GIF with the guy that says I'll allow it. But all right, so we have that, and then you said the thing I would start with is a root command. I assume I need a using for that. Yep.
Yep.
And then I would new it up.
Yeah. So why don't we just do just new up a root command, and this kind of, you don't need to pass any arguments to it if you don't want to. I think just starting from there is probably fine. The root command is kind of the entry point to the the structure that you want to build for your parser. If we do nothing else, well, before we even go down that path, if you want, right? I'm glad that part of the API is fairly intuitive so far. But I think it might be useful just to see like what the root command gives us before we go any further.
Sure. So let's just invoke IntelliSense. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, just do c dot. Do we get an invoke on this one? See if we move the extension methods into the.
Yep, we do get invoke.
Yeah, just pass your args in there.
Invokes args, and that's it.
And let's run this thing.
It didn't crash. I guess that's good.
You ran it with F5?
With control. Oh, should I? Okay,
let's run it from the command line. Because you might not see the feedback that you're looking for. That's interesting.
I got nothing, but hold on. Let me actually drag this guy over here. And then I guess so I can actually zoom in. Probably have to pass in something, right? And then see what that does.
Oh yeah, throw a double dash in it. Oh, that's cool. Yeah, that'll work.
Oh, I guess this is the feedback.
Just to make that, just in case there's some option on .NET Run that would shadow it, right? So there you've got something. Looks like you've got help.
Yep.
You've got a version option. So this is the you've done absolutely nothing so far, and you get this.
Nice.
The bottom. What I'm seeing on the stream is that our faces are hiding the code at the bottom of your terminal window.
Oh yeah, that is a problem. We can probably switch off our faces for now. Like I really wish in StreamYard I could just drag the thing somewhere else, which apparently I cannot. I can also cheat, right? Just move it up. It's like the poor man version of a scroll bar. Yeah, so basically I just ran .NET Run. Yep. And then, so my console, my project is called console. So that's why I guess the exe is called console, yep. Which then I guess you show here as the thing. Mm-hmm. And so I could specify help and see what I get there. I guess I get the same thing as there. Yep.
Yeah, so this is just, I just wanted to show that like some of this stuff kind of comes for free. Right.
And that's not bad for 2 lines of code, right? I think that's I mean, in fairness, 3 lines of code, including the using, but yeah. Sweet. So now I suppose if I want to have force, I would just say something like add option, probably, right? Would be my guess.
Yeah.
And then it takes an option, I believe. So it's an option of this, so hopefully this would work.
Yeah.
If only I could spell.
One of the changes that I think is in this version that's not in the latest beta, if I'm trying to remember if this was the case. We removed the we made option abstract, so you have to use the generic type there now. That didn't used to be the case.
So it tells me want to refer to this later, so let's do this. Now let's go back and see what help does for me now. So yeah, I can see force now. Presumably, if I specify a description here, force is the execution. Yep, now that shows up as well.
Nice.
So now my only question is how do I get an alias for this? Ha ha ha. I see. Okay, that's an overload. So I guess I can say new. So I could do that. And then now it should show up as well. Sweet.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So now I invoked it. So can I now somehow... Yeah, my question is now, how do I get access to the values? So I can pass in the args. I get back an int. But I don't see an obvious way on how I can... I guess maybe this guy has something on it. Force option, but it doesn't have a... No, it just has that. Set a default value. Okay. I can get completions, but there's no way for me to get the value. So I guess... Oh, that's in... So that's only one invoke.
I like watching you kind of struggle through this a little bit because it kind of gives me ideas about, where we can make the API a little bit more intuitive as we go.
Right.
This is the stuff that we talked about a bunch last week in the API review.
Yeah, I think I know. I remember something with handler. I think so, probably somewhere here.
Yep.
And that has a bunch of overloads. Oh yeah, a bunch of them, like 34.
Way too many. Yeah, we're going to knock these down to only 8.
Okay, these are just the generic combinatorics. That's fine.
Yep.
But I would assume there's one that gives me something like a context or something that I can actually...
Yeah, this is one of the places where this API can be made more intuitive. I think what you're hinting at here is probably what we're going to do in the next beta. So these T's are kind of unguided. Like you can you can specify a whole bunch of different types in this thing, and we don't constrain you on that. But
Right.
you have to tell System Command Line some way to get at the value. And there's certain ones that'll just magically work, and that's a discoverability trap right there. But yeah, I think what you're looking for, let's try this out. Is if you want, just try a parse result for now. There's a few different
parse result. Is it
it's a type, so pass an instance of parse result.
So like this.
Parameter. No, parse result goes to as
so I see. So I say result goes to.
Yeah, you're going to have to specify the type.
I guess I have to do that. If I do that, parse result.
Yeah.
And then in here, I can probably do something like result.
Is it IntelliSensing?
It says the type is not valid here. What are you talking about?
Put some parens around the parse result.
Oh yeah. This is the.
Or you can put it in angle brackets if you like the way that looks better.
Yeah. And then I guess I can say something for option. I see something. We'll say false option.
Yep.
And I can say something like console redline. So let's try. So if I not do, it's true.
Excellent.
If it's a -f, it also says true. And if it's nothing, it's false. Nice. Now I'm just curious. What happens if I do things like
can you size your terminal a little bit differently? I feel like
you mean bigger, or
if you could move the bottom border up to above our faces.
Oh yeah,
it just makes it a little easier to follow what you're doing in there.
Yeah, I guess that's true. So let me get this guy. Yeah, that's what I thought. Can I do? Here we go.
Nice. I was in suspense. I could hear you typing, but the cursor was behind your face. So that's...
Right. So no force doesn't work. No force doesn't work. Yeah, I guess if I want to do, I think there's like this typical convention, right? When you have Booleans, you can prefix them with no, and then they're kind of like, if the default would be true, let's say, right, which for force would obviously be weird, but for some other options, that's what's happening. But I guess I do this manually.
Yep, sure.
But it's nice that I get errors for arguments that are not recognized. So I'm used to mono options, and mono options is very much a very minimal command line parser, right? So everything it doesn't recognize, it just basically gives you back as an unparsed result, and then it's up to you to go over them and say, hey, I don't know what they are, because you may want to forward them to somebody else, or compose multiple handlers. So that makes sense. So basically, the idea is that I would. So intuitively, what I would have expected is that either invoke gives me back the parse result, and then I just put my logic after invoke, right? Or this guy already accepts some sort of like simple delegate that basically takes the parse result, right?
Yeah, we could. That's one of the things that occurred to me is that invoke could support passing the delegate in directly, and then these kind of simple cases, you crunch the code down a little bit. I think it might be
because it is a bit unintuitive to first write your logic and then say no, do it, right? That seems. At least for simple command line apps, in real world apps, of course, you would put this guy somewhere else where they actually have a method for that, right? But I think for our case here, where we just grow it,
I think you'll see. So the ambiguity there creeps in. What you're saying for simple command line apps absolutely makes sense. I think when you add a subcommand, you'll see the correspondence between the two kind of falls apart, right?
Yep.
But yeah, there's this whole, and this has kind of been a theme, right? Is like for the really simple app, you can express something in a few lines of code. And as the app increases in complexity, you find that API no longer works. Or if you say like, oh, I'm going to build my options structure over in one file, and my handlers are sitting in a different file, right? And so, and then the API suddenly becomes less intuitive when you're not looking at the complete app in a few lines of code. So trying to bridge that that's the balancing act that we've been trying to do here, and we're getting a little closer to it, but it's hard to do both things really well. And so we've talked a bunch as well about kind of an ergonomic API layer that can sit on top of this and use these lower level types to build apps as complex as you want, but have this kind of we've called it various things over time. Whatever this like ergonomic, more opinionated layer that sits on top of it that lets people do what they want. There's a really interesting one out there that's in F# that's using computation expressions that was written by Jordan Marr called F#.System.CommandLine, which is really cool. I know folks are, if anyone knows what docopt is, folks are looking at using this for the underpinnings for the, this is not a decided thing, but we've talked to them a little bit about using docopt on top of System.CommandLine. And there's another one that Kathleen has been experimenting with, which is using source generators.
Is docopt like the Python one where you basically provide the text and it parses out the options?
Yeah, it's a DSL. You write something that looks very much like your command line help, and then it builds the command line parser based on that. And there's a .NET port of that.
Yeah, is that? I think it originated in Python, right? Or am I I think I've seen this a few years ago, and I thought this was insanely clever. Like when I saw the sample code, I'm like, where do you set up what it does? And it's like, well, that's the text you're passing, and I'm like, wow, that never occurred to me. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. Yeah. So the other feedback I have is, so normally what I do when I literally get started, right? I just do this, right? System.CommandLine, and then I would just look what's in there.
Yeah. Yep.
So I don't think I would have picked root command. Like I probably would have started with command, would be my guess. Yep. Or I would have looked to something like command line builder or something that would, I guess imply to me that this is what I'm starting with. I mean, now that you told me it's root command, it makes sense. But normally, like, the thing we know from API reviews is that when people start, they, you basically look for single term classes, right? Because the more compound words you have, the more advanced or the more detailed or the more specific something sounds, right? And I think, I guess if you show me root command and command next to each other, maybe it would occur to me that one of them is the one you want, but I probably wouldn't have started with that. That being said, it's the same with mono options, right? The first time I used mono options, like I did not know at all what to do, right? The library is extremely undiscoverable in my opinion. And so, once I have a few command line apps written with it, now I mostly copy and paste the code, and I appreciate that it's very compact, but, I don't know how people would learn the library, to be honest. Like you basically have to start with sample code in order to make sense of it.
I think that's a pretty common route as well. But then you with things like Copilot and the IntelliCode, the little black star that says, this is a common API. Like some of the tooling kind of fills in this gap from the other side.
Yeah, some of it does, but I mean, I'm still kind of like old school when it comes to patterns that people use.
Yep.
And it, maybe I'm a dinosaur, but like I basically rarely use things like Copilot. I still type things in Sublime every once in a while without even getting IntelliSense, which, of course, then your life is really difficult. But that makes sense to me. So, okay, so now the next question I have is, we have options now. Let me maybe start simpler with like an out. It takes an argument with a file name. So I assume if it's not a Boolean option, so we would have something like force, or it would be, let's say, out option. I would probably start with string. I would probably say this is out. I would probably say this, file name. And then I suppose now my question is, what do I do in order to make that required? Okay, maybe it's here. What option is required? What's that? No,
seems reasonable.
And then we would say this is that works great.
This is the your mono options muscle memory is really clear in the way you're using the parse result right now, which is
yes, for sure. Now let's run this guy.
And for what it's worth, anybody who's like that set handler API that we talked about for so long during the API review, under the hood, it does exactly what you're doing right now. So that was just intended to be like a simple ergonomic layer on top of it. But it's not as intuitive in some ways. So.
Okay, yeah. I mean, probably should have called this out. Okay, that makes sense. Now, I guess.
While we're working through this, let me show you an interesting little trick.
Mm-hmm.
Go back to your terminal and just press up. Right, get that last command line back, and after the double dash, add another token in there. In square brackets, just write parse. Yeah, run that.
Okay. What is this?
So this is just showing you what the parser saw. It's kind of like a really general purpose kind of dry run kind of thing.
Oh, interesting.
Try it again, but like throw some base and invalid input in there as well. I think we want to improve like the readability of this thing. Right now, it's a little bit cryptic. It's been there effectively in this form from the very beginning. But
so I guess this means, this probably means it was not valid, would be my guess.
Yep.
Then it shows you here up until here what it found, and then here it starts. Here's all the stuff I didn't recognize.
Yeah.
Is that how to? Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. I think. Well, that's cool, because I mean that's usually the first thing I do, right? The first thing I usually do when I write a command line app is exactly what you see right now, right? I basically parse it out, I echo it back, and then, and of course, as you see here, it's kind of like a caveman, right? So you basically do this, manual string concatenation, and then once I'm done with all of this, I delete it again, right? And then 6 months later, when I have to add something, like this whole thing, it starts again. So
Yeah.
That's actually very cool because it means I don't have to do this. I can just throw this thing in here and then, and clearly it also means my handler doesn't run, which is also very nice, right? Because the only output I see right now is from your stuff.
Yeah. And there's a couple of things that are interesting about this that are maybe worth pointing out. Like one of them is not only can you use this to test your own app while you're developing it, but you can also use it to experiment with other people's apps if you happen to know it has this convention.
Right.
And then the reason for the square bracket thing, we looked for a way to, and this is you have to put it in quotes in Bash, but we looked really hard for some way to sort of limit what that token could look like structurally, without, like, if it was dry run, right? But you wanted to define your own dry run option, right? Then we can't just go shoving a dry run option into your app because that's pretty confusing. So we wanted a convention that was a little bit more like HTTP headers, where we could say this will work with any app, and it's extremely unlikely to interfere with like your specific configuration, right? Your
Gotcha.
specific options that you defined. So that's what that one is doing, and we'll come back to that. And we call it a directive.
So I guess the brackets here are just for syntactic grouping of your tree, right? They're not actually indicative of like optionality or anything like that, right?
Correct. Yep.
So if I would throw in more, if I would say, let's say force, this would also work, right? Fault. So what I didn't know. Okay, you basically tell me, you passed in force.
Yep.
But so I passed it in first with false, and then I specified it again. So
it's an interesting one.
Oh no, what happens if I do it the other way around? If I say -f, then it should be false, right? Interesting.
What's interesting here is it's showing you what it parsed, but it's not showing you the value.
Interesting. So I kind of assumed it would because it showed me the value here, right? But I guess that's just because
but you actually you fell into a pretty interesting case here, which maybe this is a bug in parse, the parse delegate. Maybe the parse delegate should indicate that this was false. It would be a little bit more useful, I think.
Yeah, I mean, now I'm wondering what actually happens if I evaluate this. Let's do that. I assume at this point I get it specified. Interesting. Why is it now? Normally, like at least for most command line parsers, it's like last one wins.
Yeah, I think this is a bug.
So if I now do this,
it should be
false,
last one
right?
wins. Yeah, that's false.
Yeah.
Oh, wait a second.
That is dash, right?
I see. Yeah.
So okay, so now it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one.
It should be last one wins, and that looks like a bug to me.
Somebody in chat says T4 is the answer for all. That might be true, but then it highly depends on what the question was. Yeah, so that, yeah, okay. So yeah, so my next goal would be, let's get some inputs going. And so that's one of those areas where mono options is a bit on the weird side. You do this in various ways.
Mm-hmm.
I try a bit. I mean, I used to do this caveman thing where I specified everything as options, or even had like -in or -in for input files, which I found a bit more discoverable, mostly because of the help. Because if you do the default help, it just says, here's a bunch of options, and you just have to know that you can parse parameters, right? Or basically meaning standalone options.
Oh yeah.
So let's do this. So let's say input. I guess there are arguments in your world, right? Input arguments, new argument, I guess. Name, let's say input. Let's see what ends up happening here. If I say, I guess this is add arguments. Add argument. And then we would say for each var argument in I guess result get value for argument. Interesting. So, okay, what happens if I make this a string array? I think this is what we want. Then I can say let's say input files. File. Okay, so now let's see. Okay, so that did what I thought it would. So now what do I get when I ask for help? Oh, that's cool. Yeah, that's exactly what I hoped would happen.
Yeah.
It tells me that. Yeah.
I was just going to footnote what about that line. We're going to flip the order of the options and arguments in that usage. There's an open issue for that.
Oh, that options comes first and then input comes after?
Yeah. Relative to one another, it actually doesn't matter what order you specify them in. So that's kind of one of the distinctions between an option and an argument. The options, is what's sometimes called a named parameter versus an unnamed parameter, right?
Right.
The options can come in any order, but the arguments have to come, relative to other arguments, have to come in a specific order.
Why do you want to flip them in the output?
It's because it's more common for, I think, just as a convention, I think it's more common for people to put the arguments at the end.
Yeah, I guess that's
just
true.
like you did when you tested it just now, right?
So the only reason why, so in the help output, I think I would prefer this order, mostly because in my experience, you have a lot more options than you have arguments. And if you put the arguments at the very end, I would just think people would not see it.
No. So the thing that you just described, we will keep it the way it is. The thing that I'm pointing to is it's just that one usage line where it says console and then
I see.
brackets input and then options. It's just flipping that brackets input and the bracket options, reversing.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So now the next thing is, I guess, how do I make it so that I have at least one? Let's see, input arguments. What do we have on this guy? That seems like what I want. What is that? Arity, argumentarity, I guess. Interesting. I think I vaguely remember that there were statics as well. So, okay, so the common ones you have, exactly one or more. In my case, there would be one or more. Which I guess is the most common thing for most people. Okay. It doesn't change in the help. Now if I do this, I should get an error that says you need at least one. The thing happened. Required argument missing for command console. Interesting, okay. I mean, I'm the author. I think I know what that means of this command line app, but if I were a user, I don't think I would make sense of this line. Like I would expect something like, you need to specify, one or more values for input or something. Like the link between this and this
and
here.
The specific argument that you didn't provide.
Yeah.
Yeah. The actual error, the actual error objects that you'll get back, if you wanted to interact with the API directly, do specify which ones are missing. So that's a kind of change we could make to the error message pretty easily. we have the parser has that information. It's just not surfacing it. I think it would tend to be like if you were actually to build and deploy your app or package it up in a NuGet package, the end user is going to be running console-o foo CSV. So it's slightly more intuitive, but again, it's like you're saying, it's not pointing you to exactly what argument was missing. It gets kind of complicated after a while because you could imagine, sometimes there might be one of multiple different things that might be missing. And once the parser stops being able to make sense of what's happening, it's sometimes a little bit ambiguous. But I think there are probably cases like this where it's straightforward.
Yeah, on that note, Panosa is asking, what happens when you define multiple arguments? What I guess at that point it's order, right? So if I have one that is basically argument one or more, I would assume if I define one more argument, it either is ignored or I would hope that probably what should happen is that this thing should explode, right? Because I mean you can never parse it, right? If I now say argument, I don't know, bool, test, I would expect that to clearly fail. It doesn't. But I mean, this would never get any values, right? Because this guy will consume every argument.
Yeah.
My expectation.
We can do this, but it's definitely getting to some of the more advanced APIs. But I think we'll get there. I don't know if you want to jump ahead.
So I'm just curious. What do you mean by you just say if I can parse it as a bool, it goes here. If I can't, it goes here.
I don't know. Did you what?
Right.
I don't think we just I don't think we do that. I think we did it one time, but it leads to some ambiguous parsing.
Let's test the argument, maybe. Keep the arity here, and then let me just add this guy here. That makes a huge difference, but we'll do this. Right. Test argument. Maybe let's make it an int, so it's a bit more interesting as a value. I guess. That's it. What? Did I specify as required?
Try the parse delegate again. It might make it a little bit clearer as to what's happening. Or the parse directive.
So that's kind of what I expected it would parse. So basically, yeah, this guy goes here, this guy goes here, this guy has not seen anything. But why does it insist there's something missing? I mean, yes, there's two arguments, but I specified one as one or more, and the other one I didn't do anything. So I guess it defaults to exactly one or something like that. Yeah. So if I say arity is argument arity 0 or 1, let's say, then I assume this would succeed, and I would just get back 0. Yep. And so if I now say 42, I would think that I get still 0, and then the 42 basically is consumed by the previous one.
Yep.
That makes sense to me.
That's good. This is so one of the things that's worth explaining about what's going on here, right? The arity, you don't have to set the arity.
Right.
What the arity is saying is how many times can this token appear on the command line, right?
Right.
We're gonna infer the arity for you based on the type. So you've seen this here with the string array, it was 0 or more, right? With int, it was exactly 1. So typically, most types break down into two different default arities, right? One is we expect exactly one of these, right? And the other one is 0 or more, And
That makes sense, yeah.
Basically, the 0 or more is any kind of collection type, right? Enumerables, lists, anything. If it's IEnumerable other than string, right? Then you're going to get the 0 or more arity by default. You can always override it, right?
So you're saying if I do this and I comment this, then I should get null. I get null. And if I do this, it will. Yeah, it basically infer the arity as 0 or 1, right?
I think it did, yeah. This is a detail that's intuitive, but there are many details like this. I'm like, oh yeah, did we do that? Someone cleverer than me obviously did that. So.
Yeah, that makes sense. Actually, this is actually quite nice, I have to say. It didn't occur to me that the arity was inferred from the type, but it completely makes sense. That is intuitive. It's just that, yeah, I guess I'm already too much into parser, and I'm like, yeah, I need to specify what I expect here.
This is kind of when we talk about the binding piece, like a lot of the complexity here and a lot of the work has gone into making sure that we use the .NET type system in a way that hopefully makes sense, right? And we say, okay, what is the type that you're expecting? Can we populate that in a sort of sensible and reasonable way from the command line input?
Yeah, so someone is asking, for multiple arguments, how can one define something like MS-Build's property option, where you basically have /p : foo equals bar? I think in this world, you would basically have basically a string array for property, and then the strings you're getting is basically foo equals bar, bar equals bar, start equals end, and then it's up to you to split that because it's part of your own domain language at that point. It's not part of the, like, it's not a multi-key value pair, command line convention, right? That's kind of custom at this point.
It is, but this kind of goes directly to this question of saying, how do we make, well, first of all, some of the things that you've been seeing, right? Parsing errors. We want to surface a parsing error before we call your handler, right?
Right.
So you could shift some of the validation into the handler and do this kind of secondary parse there. But we really wanted the ability for the parser itself to be able to hold this logic so that you get this consistent experience.
I see. So you're saying if I have an argument, or let's say it's an option of key value pair of string, string,
yep.
I could provide this guy with I guess.
What's the type you actually want?
Yeah. So let's try this. So let's say we have another option here. Let's call this key value pair of string, only I could type string, string. This is a theme for all my streams, by the way, just so you know.
Yeah.
And then we say this is, yeah, well, I'm just horrible at typing. And then we say -p because I'm lazy.
Yep. We can throw a /p in there too.
To make it really awful.
No,
yeah, no, I know.
This is the question, right? Yeah, that's fair. One of the things that has been an explicit goal is we wanted the parser to be flexible enough that if you decided that the feature set of System command line was compelling enough, and you wanted to rebuild an old application onto System command line's API, that we would be able to handle all of these strange cases. So it's and then plus it's the union of Linux, POSIX command line conventions, as well as Windows command line conventions. We wanted you to be able to do all of these things.
So I guess return default utilities bind.
Okay.
Clearly, I'm horrible at named argument specifies parameter. Oh, parse argument takes more than one parameter. Is that what's happening here? At this point, is that not a? Oh, I see. This is it is a delegate. Oh, it takes a single argument and returns t. What's your problem here?
What's it complaining about?
It says named argument specifies a random for which a position argument has already been given. Oh, sorry. It's again syntactically. I'm terrible at writing them. This as it turns out.
Oh, you know what I think this is? Put description : in front of property. Description is optional.
So you said the description. I need to do the description like.
Yeah, where you have property dot there. Yep, that's where you want property.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
It's because
the
description parameter is
see.
optional, and for this constructor overload, parse argument is not optional. Yeah.
And then we call this, let's say, properties options, I guess. I guess in this case, we would have to say it's, yeah, that's a good point, actually. So let's start with property option. And then in here, I can say something like, I guess, S is argument. Interesting. So how do I get the actual raw string now? So, I mean, I can't quite ask for self, so error message is settable. So I assume this is where I would set the error if there is one. But how do I get, I guess, tokens, right? That would give me that. So, okay, so let's say it's no default. I guess token is what? A class. So I guess this one would give me null. So if t is null, I can say something like as error message. Actually, let's call this parsed argument or whatever it was. Really name that makes a bit more sense. Need a value or something. And then I can say else. I would probably do something like t dot. Okay, so it is. Okay, no, it is a class. Okay, split, and then I don't know, equal sign, and then if parts length is not 2, and I would do something like need to specify t equals value.
It's interesting to see whether people write the error cases first or the happy case first. It tells you a lot about a person.
Yeah, usually like for things like where I expect a certain number of things, I do that, but not necessarily for all cases. But yeah, then I would say var key equals parts. And then value would be the other one. And then I would say return key, create for key and for value. I guess that would not. Oh, actually, would that be? Yeah. Yeah, because you're supposed to return the value. Yep. Okay, so we have that. Now let's just see what we get. P would be result get value for argument, and then we said this is our property, the option. I guess then we should get value for. And that's actually a good point. Why do you have different overloads here? Because there are different methods. Why would you not just say get value and then overload based on argument versus option?
I think that we do have, we might have a convenience overload that will take either or both of them. It just requires, so there's actually a bunch of things in here. If we wanted to have a discussion about where we've gotten really nitpicky about performance, things like that are one of the things that we tend to say, make it more explicit, reduce cyclomatic complexity in implementation, and just keep crunching it down. Adam Sitnick has done a bunch of really great work on performance for this, because there's a bunch of things that we're doing for performance that are a little bit unintuitive compared to more typical .NET apps that are long running, because command line apps, we expect them to start up and shut down very, very quickly. shell completions are one of the examples where this is really important. So this, I think here we kind of just wanted explicitness, but then we didn't change it back because we said, well, let's just keep the code path, absolutely as simple as possible.
Yeah, it just seems like
polishing the nose cone.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't think it would impact perf, right? Because you basically, it's just an overload, right? The compiler chooses the right one, and they're disjoint types. Like, you don't have to do type checks, right?
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah,
I think that would just be. I mean, it just seems like it's just a suffix that is kind of like clearly specified.
I think it was mainly just for specificity, for just making the code read more clearly, but I don't know.
Okay, so now let me say p equals foo. That should fail, right? Ironically, I guess this still should have done something different. Oh, yeah, the problem is that we still have these guys in here, so we probably need to not add. Well, for starters, I need to add the argument, I think.
Yes.
By the option, add the option. Oh, it should work.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is one of those places where there's a little bit of redundancy in the API where you've got to add the option there and then also into the handler.
Okay, so now this is my error. Need to specify key equals value. Yep, here we go. And if I now do this, I should. Okay, you provide this one. If I do this, same problem.
Yep.
So that means my code here would never get triggered, right? It would always be.
Yeah. And you can actually, the arity is going to protect this call generally from having the wrong number of tokens.
Okay.
The arity check will happen before we even try to call your custom parse delegate. So you can be a little bit more,
So now my question is, so what happens if I want to do an actual MS build style thing? Because then this would not be a single one. Yep. This would be an array of things, right?
Yes.
Now I'm a bit, because now basically I guess the tokens I'm getting now are the individual things. So I suppose I could do something like this would be the generic start to suck a little bit. You can say for each var t in p.tokens. I can take this. And then it's result to array. And then this is something like this. So interesting. I guess here what I really want to say is something like value here. T but the value. So get from this, we get the invalid option. We can say foo equals bar. Yeah, of course, we need to change our output here. My mistake. For each var p in feet.
You got a backtick there. That's yeah.
Interesting. So why is that nullable? I guess. Yeah, I didn't say it's nullable.
No, that was compiler warning.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm just confused that the inferred value of this option here is not my t, but always a nullable t. And then of course I have to do.
Here, you just.
Okay, so we get foo bar.
Yep.
And now if I say as okay, and if I specify something like that, I get an error that says invalid key value pair bar bas.
Yep.
Nice.
You should be able to do /p equals foo equals bar, and that should work as well.
Yep.
Yeah, so we're permissive on the delimiter. You can use a colon or an equals or a space, and those are all equivalent. May not, MS Build might not like it, but System.CommandLine will let you do it.
So I guess my next question is, what happens if I do this?
Those are separate tokens now.
Yeah, now you get this. Now what I would have to do is I have to do this now. Now I get what I expect. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so like, okay, so you take care of the bundling and the unbundling of the quotes.
The shell did that for you.
Oh, that's right, because you get like this thing as one thing. Yeah.
Yeah, but so there are parse overloads. If this is kind of going into the parts of the API that you haven't looked at yet, but if you did root command.parse, you can get back a parse structure instead of going root command.invoke. And that parse structure, that parse method, you can pass an array into it, just like you would expect. But you can also pass in a string. And we'll parse that whole command line string as close as we can to what the main entry point will actually receive. So we will handle that for you if you do parse it as a string.
Gotcha. Yeah, I remember that.
That's really handy for testing too, because if you're testing your command line app and you pass an array into it, it's pretty easy to get the array wrong as compared to what the shell and then main invocation is going to do, right?
Right.
Because there's a lot of weird cases like this. So for testing, we tend to recommend just using, just put the complete string in there and we'll tokenize it correctly for you.
Yeah, so I guess another thing I would want to do here, just validation-wise for the input, would be, this is actually a file that exists on disk, which I think I saw there's a validation add validator, right? Where I could probably do the same thing, where I could just say, is this an actual file that exists?
I can give you a shortcut here. Oh, that's interesting. Do you really want those as strings? Now that we've been down this key value pair path.
Right. I don't care. I mean, I think for the most part, yes, because I think for the most part, when I parse files, I have to parse them to subsequent things, which by far expect things as strings. But it could be anything else. It could be a file info for all I cared. So yeah, I guess you're saying if I make this a file info array, then I get that for free.
And I mean, and there's a reason for this one too, right? Files and directories are such common argument types for command line parsing. Right?
Yep.
So we try to make the common things as easy as possible.
So okay, let's get rid of this. Yep, I still get it. And now, but I still have to say, does this thing exist? So I guess I could do this here, but I could just ask whether the testing actually exists. Sorry, the input file actually exists, right?
You can do it here. We also have a validation for it. Again, trying to push the validation into the parser.
Right.
The goal is, it's a little bit like it's a similar flow to what you might expect in like ASP.NET, right? Where
Right.
if the validation for whatever set of reasons for a controller is not met at the request handling layer, the controller doesn't get called in the first place, right? So you hope that all the validation short circuits the execution of your handler,
right?
And so that's kind of the way that we've tried to structure this. Actually, so do this. Back up from add validator. Add validator gives you a kind of highly customizable experience, kind of like that parse argument does. But just hit dot there. Go back. Let's look at the completion list. Scroll down a little bit. I think we will see. Aha.
Interesting. So now. Haha. That's cool. And I assume this guy is chainable. It is, so I can just do this, right? I could just do existing only. Yeah, so what is the default? Like, I think the inferred arity is 0 or more, right?
0 or more for innumerable times.
Yeah. So there's no 1 or more for chaining, right? So I would have to actually.
Right. Yep.
Oh. Okay, that's awesome. Legal file names only. That would make sense for my output because clearly the output wouldn't exist. So I guess I could do.
And this works for there's the directory info and file system info will work this way too.
So I guess file names would imply that it's a name of a file, not a directory. Or I guess that it would be just a file without a path, right? So it couldn't contain slashes. So in our case, I would probably say file paths because I don't care where it is at. And now if I do something crazy, it'll work. Well, it wouldn't because the file doesn't exist. Okay, that's fine. File actually does exist here. So that's another interesting thing. So what is the... Some weird completion happening here. So there's full, actually, let's say ls. What do we have here? So if I say program.cs, and it's so basically, yeah, it is the current directory that it's relatively to. That makes sense too. And so now we can say out would be bar. Let's see. Only problem because actually there. Let's try. Remember which one is it? Oh, this is the one I think where. Really, dollar is valid. It seems surprising. What else do we have that is not? What about this guy? Is this valid in file names? It is. What is an invalid character in a file name?
Is it a file name or a slash is invalid in a file name, but not in a path, obviously.
I see. So
try backslash, or no, backslash should be fine. Question. That's interesting.
I mean, clearly that can't be legal, right? Or
that should
star. Did I do something wrong?
I don't know. Where's out option? Legal file paths only.
Here. Maybe it's legal file name. Let's try this one for a second. It's not valid because there's a slash in there. Okay, that makes sense. So, but then this should fail, right? Really? I guess on Unix you can probably create a file with that name. You can just never query that again.
Right. Yeah. But it should be OS specific.
Yeah, that should fail, right? I mean, what does this method do? It goes in here. Okay, that would have been useful. I guess I can't look into the code.
That option argument is an internal property. The option has an argument, but it's not part of the public API. If anyone saw that and was confused.
Yeah, right. But like, I mean, normally you would expect that VS can decompile that, right? Because I mean,
I don't know if it's part of the, maybe because it's not public, it's not part of the.
Yeah, but that shouldn't be a problem for the decompiler, right? Yeah. Either way. Yeah, okay. I mean, that might be a bug, right? Because we pulled down the nightlies, but you know, that would be the way we would do that. So I think I'm already pretty far in. So now what I would like to do, I think, is play with subcommands.
Okay.
So I would assume if I just say var, let's say, run command. Let's call this just run because let's say new command. Call this run. And then instead of saying this, we just do this. And then I have to say c add command, run command. So then everything would still work similar, oopsie, except that somewhere like here, right? Except I now have to say run, so that should still work. No. Oh, because we invoked the wrong command. No, we did invoke the right one. Oh, I see. So we set the handler for the root command. I guess we have to set the handler for the root command now. Okay, that did what I thought. And so I guess if I now do this, then it says I need to specify a command. Presumably, if I would have said c add handler, let's say it would be, yeah, forgetting the parentheses. Oh, we need to do, as I said, parse without PR.
I'm muted. I'm over here. Trying to supplement your compiler. You need a closing paren after that PR.
Yeah, that's no, this should give me. Okay, so I could have done that. I guess that makes sense, right? So for things like Git, for example, where you want to say instead of giving you just the error message, you could, list the most commonly used commands or something like that.
Yep.
Okay, so then I guess if I do this, I should get help, hopefully, that says there is a subcommand. And if I do run, I get the help for run. Mm-hmm. Nice. That's awesome. Yeah, I find that very intuitive. That is kind of exactly what I would think would happen. And then I guess in your world, because the way you compose them, you can also have subcommands of subcommands of subcommands, right? You can just whatever the syntax allows you to do, basically.
Yeah. It really is kind of a tree structure. And you can have subcommands within subcommands. So if you think about .NET add package, right? .NET is the root command, add is a subcommand, package is a subcommand. And then some intermediate subcommands, if this structure gets deep enough, you might have intermediate subcommands like .NET add, where it's not actually valid to call that without one of its subcommands.
Right.
And we handle that by just saying if a command doesn't have a handler, then you can't call it directly. It acts more like a namespace or something in that case.
Yeah, that makes sense because that's usually what. Yeah, so in my own command line apps, because I'm lazy, I solved this problem by just having effectively one set of commands, and I just put a dash in between, and then this is which is of course the super lame version of that. Could have done spaces as well, but that would have complicated my parsing, so I didn't bother.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's an interesting one. So, yeah, that makes sense to me. So yeah, another one that just occurred to me. How do I customize this? So in mono options, you basically have to surround the text with braces. You would do something like this here, for example, which the only reason I know this is because at some point I decompiled it and looked at what's happening there. And that's how I found it out, because as I said, the docs are super approachable. Here it seems
yeah, we started out with some of those kinds of conventions at one point, and we eventually just kind of pulled them all out, and we just said everything is a fully built out object model for all these kinds of cases, right? Because those kind of like string conventions, they're really hard to discover, and the tooling doesn't help you find them. So
they are not. Like that's the. Yeah, I'm undecided. Like for things like this, I think the amount of typing you have to do is minimal, right? But I mean, I wouldn't mind if we had an option like this, right? Because it seems common enough that seems somewhat discoverable, and I think this is fine.
Yeah, well, that kind of goes back to the other thing, which is how do we get if you have a command line app that has to parse arguments at runtime, not parse arguments to the command line input, right? But it's parsing the arguments to your option constructor, right? So that's a string split that every user's machine has to do every time they run your app.
Yes, that is right.
And so I think conventions like that I think they can be really helpful if people know the convention. But our opinion on that is people should lean into the tooling that's going to give them the best performance. And so if we want that, we should do it via a source generator later.
Yeah.
And so the lower API tries to be really opinionated about doing things that are where we can optimize performance for as much as possible.
Yeah, intuitively, I would say like the allocation or the other things that happen here are probably dwarfing like things like a split on like a string that has like 30 characters. But yeah, if you do something like CSC, or I think like Tanner is working on something for LLVM, right, where you take like 1,200 different command line parameters, that at some point it starts to add up, and you do a lot of useless work that doesn't have to happen.
And every little bit counts, and that's
No, I mean, this is the problem with startup, right? It's like we want something that is snappy, right, and immediately returns, and so that makes sense. So I don't see an obvious way to do that.
You scrolled past it, but
argument help name, I guess this is the one, right? So this is let's say file name. It's the path, let's say. No. Here we go. Okay, that makes sense.
Yep. There's a whole area of help customization that we can explore if you're interested. Help custom. We have a very rich API for customizing help, and so you scratched one of the built-in pieces, but you can completely change this output from top to bottom if you want.
Yeah, I suppose I can get an object model that describes all of this, right? And then I can do my own fancy thing. Do you have any built-in colorization for this?
We don't. We have, other than what you see with the red error messages, we need to add support for no color, but we don't. But one of the things, it is a common ask. When you were looking at the list of packages before, there's a package in there called System.CommandLine rendering. And we did a bunch of experimentation there because early on in this thing, we said, customizing help output is kind of begs for some template of some kind, so people can do things that are really open-ended. And so we experimented with that a little bit, and we were looking at the fact that Windows Terminal has now joined the rest of the universe in supporting VT100 codes, and you can do all kinds of coloring with that. And that's the right way to do coloring inside of virtual terminals and these kinds of things. So System.CommandLine rendering turned into an experiment around templating and VT support, and then eventually we realized it was just too big and too out of scope. And then Spectre Console appeared. It's a bunch of great work by Patrick Svensson and a bunch of other folks on that library. It's wonderful. So we said, well, how do we just let people compose things like that in here and not try to solve that problem yet? Because the real solution to terminal versus console separation and VT codes and these kinds of things kind of belongs down in the BCL, right?
Right.
So we said, okay, we're not going to try to ship that here. We just want to make it easy for people to pull that kind of stuff in. So if you want to do console coloring and richer output tables, like diagrams, whatever you want in here, we have a sample actually that shows how to do this in our help. If you want, we can go down that path, or we can talk about completions, or we can talk about other features.
Yeah, so what would be interesting, I think, for me is like, because that was the thing that we discussed in the API review, right, where I had very strong opinions, is like, okay, now we wrote all of this stuff here, which to me is still acceptable, but I think you said like there is a better way of doing that, right? So I think there's like two common ways, I think. One of them is, I have a method that takes effectively these things as arguments. And another one is I have a type that exposes them all as properties, right? So I'm curious how I would get from A to B, basically, for those two scenarios.
Yeah, got it. So this is the part of the set handler API that needs to be simplified a bit. When you were looking at the IntelliSense list on this thing before, it's got 32 overloads or something that are all for just different combinations of a couple different things that C# doesn't make it easy to choose one over the other, right? Do we want an int return type for the handler, or is the handler just an action? Is it async or not? And then how many different generic parameters are on it? And by the time you get the combination of all those options, you wind up with way too many overloads actually for people to really understand what they're trying to choose. So I think we want to simplify that. We can look at that API. It's the one that we were talking about before. And it's a little bit unintuitive, so I suspect we're going to change something about it. But the path that you're on right now, this will just kind of scale as much as you need it, right? You could have a million options on your parser, and you're able to just kind of pick all the values out of here one by one and do what you need with them.
Right.
If you want richer objects in there, we have a couple of places to allow you to build that up. And that's part of that is to prevent the overload explosion on set handler, right? Because if on set handler, I think we're going to go down to up to eight generic parameters.
Yeah, I suppose that these T's are effectively the T's of those arguments.
Yeah.
And I think I remember correctly, like you pass in effectively the delegate, and then you pass in, I guess, symbols, which I guess in your world would be the options and arguments, right?
It can be options, arguments, or something else that will bind a symbol. And so we have a really simple shim type for that. And so the idea is that if you've got 100 different options, right, you can create this binder. And it does exactly what you're doing here. It just plucks the values off of the parse result, but then it can, call a constructor or set properties or whatever and return that richer model that you want.
So let's just, for sake of argument, say I have let's say run. Let's say I void run, and then we say it takes a bool force. It takes what did we say? A file info input. I guess it's an array because we have multiple of those, and then it takes a string output path. I think we have an output. Something like that, right? And then let's not bother with anything right now. And then I probably could say something like, you're writing this whole thing. Let's just come out for now. And then just say set handler. I believe I could now say something like run. And then I can probably say, okay, what do I have to pass in the fourth option? That's my first argument, right? My second one is the input, I guess. Input arguments, and then this is the out option, right? Out option. And that fails to bind. That's already good. Okay, so what's your problem here? The type arguments from method cannot be inferred. Okay, that's unfortunate. So I guess it's an extension method, right?
Yeah.
So while I take an action, okay, now I'm.
What's the signature of run? This is where the things.
This is signature.
Mm-hmm.
So I think input, let's check, but I think input was a bunch of file infos. Out is a string.
So what's, oh, I see what's happening here.
Okay.
Right. So it's that same problem. You need to tell it what types are being passed in. So it won't just infer the generic parameters of set handler based on the input parameter types for run.
I see. So I would have to say something like.
Yeah. Now we could, I think we can tighten this up by allowing the options and arguments that you passed in to be used for type inference. The reason they can't right now is because of that params. And the reason for the params is so that we can support arbitrary other types like parse result and invocation context and things where we already know the type and so we know how to pass it to you and you don't have a sensible option or argument to pass in for it.
So, but isn't run effectively this here action of T1, T2, T3?
It's not because, well, so it is. But we need to have the generic parameter types on set handler, right? So we can't infer them on set handler. And the reason is because the arity is flexible because of the params. We can tighten this up to improve the inference, I think.
So I would have to do this, I suppose.
Yep. Yeah, that would work. So we could infer those if there was a fixed number. And this was one of the suggestions that was made during the API review, is just to get rid of the params and have a fixed number of parameters to this, for example, to set handler that corresponds to the run method, and then we can do the type inference. And I think that'll be a lot more intuitive.
Yeah. So we just now run this, it should work. I guess this won't work because we don't have specified anything. So that makes sense. So basically this gets rid of all the get.
Yep.
I just have to be careful in which order I pass those in.
Yep.
Presumably if I do this, it shouldn't compile, right? I guess
this one does because of the params. So this is
yeah, because you do, you take it as an I-value descriptor.
Yeah. The I-value descriptor is the shim that allows you to come along with a custom binder, for example. Yep. Which I think we will need in any case because lots of people have more than 8 options and arguments on there.
I mean, if you make individual T's, I mean, it doesn't help your, I guess, overload soup here, but I think it would at least give you a static error if you swap something, or if the number of arguments in the run doesn't match the number of parameters you pass in here, right? Like common errors like this would be, I mean, it would actually be nicer, I think, because it also would. So I think if you simplify the overloads here, you basically have one overload that is only responsible for binding a delegate to a number of options. You probably could get away with this as well. Now it should, like, if you actually have individual overloads, then everything is inferred, and that would actually be quite nice because it doesn't force me to repeat myself, especially with things like key value pair of something, right? Then it just becomes really annoying if you have to type it twice.
Yep.
Exactly. And then it might also be easier to understand if, like, I mean, the problem with overloads is not, I mean, overloads themselves are not the problem. At least we find in API reviews if something takes 16 arguments, so long it's intuitive what happens, right? Or if you basically you explore the first 3 and you see, oh, it's just chaining, it just gets more and more arguments. People don't care whether it's 16 or 30, right? It becomes problematic when you have effectively 4 disjoint groups of things that can happen, and then each of them has 10 logical overloads, and you bunt them all together, because now I have to go through all 30 to find the 4, right? That are telling me what actually happens. But if you just have one method here that all it does is binds the delegate, I think that would be probably fine.
Yeah, and this used to be a good bit simpler, because the older API, which, one of the packages that has appeared recently is System.CommandLine naming convention binder. That one was all reflection based, and so it was actually a lot simpler. You had to kind of understand the convention, but it was a lot more flexible in terms of how you could do these kinds of things. But we were figuring it all out at runtime using reflection, and that was obviously a big performance trap. And it also blocked us from being able to make System.CommandLine apps trimmable.
Yeah.
So we moved all those APIs out. They're in System.CommandLine naming convention binder, because a lot of people wrote code against those APIs, and we didn't want to just rip it out from under them. But that'll be kind of, released, and then probably not see a lot of improvements from there, because we do think the trimming and native AOT compilation are really important areas for command line apps generally, right? You want to have nice small executables, and we wanted to make sure that this parser could handle that kind of a deployment.
Yeah, so there's a few questions in chat. So I personally have never played with the Spectre console command line parsing. I've used Spectre console mostly for rendering. Have you tried it? Can you talk to it how it differs from what we have here?
I have not used the parsing heavily in Spectre console either. I've used it a bunch for the rendering, right? And not as I've kind of looked a little bit at the parsing APIs, but not in great depth. So
yeah, mono options does nothing, right? Mono options basically gives you a delegate with a string, and then the world is your oyster. But it also means you do whatever you want to do. If you want to do validation, you do it. If you don't, then you don't. But there's nothing built in for you. I mean, this is, I think, usually the problem with most libraries, is that I think that's something I said in API review too, right? If you look at Web API, for example, or whatever it's called now in ASP.NET, where effectively you write in a REST API, there's a gazillion ways how you can bind URL parameters to .NET types, right? And that becomes quickly yet another serializer kind of thing, right? It starts easy with let's just support ins and bools, and then it's like, oh, it's my own custom objects, and by my own custom objects, I am mutable. I only support factory methods now, and then it basically very quickly gets into all the complexity that any general purpose serializer has. And I think this is usually where the complexity goes through the roof very, very quickly. So I guess this is one way of doing it, right? So I think another thing that I see that people have done in the past, and I think, I'm not sure you ever looked at our history, right? We had a command line parser proposed for .NET 3.5, I think, 20 years ago. And this was the good old .NET like attribute soup, right? Where the idea is you define a type that represents your command, and then you put a ton of attributes on the properties, and that's where you would specify things like descriptions and how many, but most of the things would just be inferred by the .NET shape of the parameters object, if you will, right? We all hated it, and so we ended up not shipping it. I suppose that is a way of doing it, but I don't think you have anything built in that does that, right?
Right. That kind of falls into this category of more opinionated API layers that could sit on top of this. If people like that style of API, that's great. But under the hood, that thing always is going to have some representation of these more low-level concepts. And we just wanted to start with an API that would be a good foundation for all of those kinds of things. And so all of that stuff is really explicit here. And most of the conventions have been kind of gradually stripped out.
So there's no thing that you have like a binder that I give it a T, and then somehow you construct a parameter object for this together, right?
Right. That's the naming convention binder. The naming convention binder, for example, you could have if you had a type that had properties on it A, B, C, and D, right?
Okay.
Then you could define an option A, an option B, an option C, an option D, right? And the naming convention binder would match the names of the options up to the names of either constructor parameters or settable properties on your target type, right? So it's very much a model binder, much more like the ASP.NET model binders. But it's quite an expensive thing to do in a command line app, and so we move that out into a separate library. It definitely can produce some more concise code, but you're going to take a little bit of a performance hit for it, and so we didn't want that to be central.
That would be something like this, right?
Yep. Yeah. Exactly.
And then
the naming convention binder will just build this thing for you with no further configuration needed. You just say command handler.create of T, where T is run command options, and it's just going to figure it all out for you from the parse result.
This would be this guy here, right?
Yeah. Yep. And this is in beta 1, this is the API you see. And for the last couple of years, this has been the predominant API. So you'll see a lot of samples using command handler.create. That's the naming convention binder now. That was moved out of the core system command line, but there's quite a bit of code kicking around out there.
So let's do this, and then we say, let's hear this for now. I'm lazy. And now, what do I do here?
And so instead of run command.setHandler, what you do is you do run command.handler equals command handler.create. But again, this is the older API. I don't know that we want to steer too many people towards it at this point. It's kind of.
Oh, I see. So okay, yeah, I'm just curious, like basically what that would look like. So, but so you said like you would do what? You would do.
It would do run command.handler equals command handler.create.
I see. Equals, and then you said what new?
Command handler.create. It's factor method. No new involved. So this handler type, a lot of these different opinionated API layers will ultimately come down to configuring the parser and then creating an implementation of command handler, which is what this handler is. And it's a very simple interface to implement.
What happened here? Okay. So now I guess this would do what I think it does, and probably now I have some naming issues. Why does it?
You need a using for that. Oh, and this is a .NET run bug where it's.
Oh no! It just keeps running forever.
Yeah.
Oh great! That's fun.
I think that's been fixed.
No.
I don't know what version it's fixed in, but yeah, that .NET run bug is a good one.
This makes sense.
You need to add a using statement for naming convention binder.
Yeah, it did, but so it showed up, but now it doesn't complete it. Ew, there's no using that comes up with that. Oh, this doesn't resolve now. What is your problem?
Oh, maybe wait.
I think there's a problem with the package. It doesn't resolve the thing anymore. Okay, let's do. Okay. Showed up earlier. That is weird.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on there.
Let's try this. Let's try to install again. Maybe I hit decline or something. This is when you play with nightlies.
So someone asked in the chat, is there a way to determine whether an option is set versus it being the default? Which is also a good question.
Yeah, I suppose you would make it nullable and then give it a non-null default.
So there's the little, where you've got that custom parse argument of T. There's this, the object that you're interacting with there is an argument result. And that's got you were looking at the tokens collection that's hanging off of that, right? So the tokens is kind of the raw pre-parsed input. And so I think that the way to do that is to look at the tokens and to say, is there a token for this thing? I'm trying to remember. Internally, we have an implicit token. I don't know if you can see that in the public API.
Okay, so this worked. Yeah. So the downside with the convention builder, of course, is that you need to match your conventions, right? But that's
yeah, exactly. And this is always the problem with conventions, right? Is I mean, historically in .NET, they're great when they work where you already know them. They can make things really concise, but then they can be hard to discover unless you have tooling that's aware of the convention.
Yep.
And then in the world of .NET, conventions almost always means reflection.
Yes. I mean, every serializer is a convention-based binder, effectively. It's just a very convoluted one, where you very often don't see the intermediate representations, but that's so. One thing that I'm not entirely sure of, like in the API review, we talked about. No, that's something terrible here with my two windows. We talked a little bit about duplication. So I don't see any obvious duplication here, because it seems like all the names of stuff is kind of like in one spot.
Yep.
Everything else is typed. The only case where that's lost is effectively if I do something like this and I have to match these property names up. But if I do this manual binding, or if I do the normal thing with the delegate, then I don't see any duplication. Am I just was this an old API problem, or is this something that's just I'm just not doing it the way it causes duplication?
Well, I think the duplication is that you have to add the duplication is here. I think you just have a higher tolerance for slightly more explicit code. Is that you have to add take one of your input file option, right? You had to add it both to the parser, and then you had to specify it again in the set handler or either.
Oh, I see what you're saying. You mean like this part here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is the yeah, I guess. I mean, I think to me, this part here is something I would like to get rid of. That one is to me duplication, because I already told you here. Why do I have to specify it here again? But that's just because of the way we happen to, basically have to help the compiler along, right? But that wouldn't be necessary. But this one makes sense to me because fundamentally, like the types here cannot be descriptive enough to tell me where things go, right? So if I take like 4 string arguments, it's like, well, which one did you meant to go there, right? So it would be, I guess, if we really wanted to be fancy, it would be nicer if I could almost say it here, right? Somehow, or on here, and then basically have it source generated that it just aligns it, right? And then I don't have to do this myself. But that to me is, I guess in that case I have higher tolerance. That to me seems fine. I'm less tolerant about configuration, right? Where you have to specify a name in 2 places, and then if I change it, I have to update it in 2 places. That one is I mean, again, if it's a variable name, then it's fine because the compiler will force me to update it in all places. But if it's a string, then that would be terrible. That would be terrible.
And that's another reason why we don't have a way to look up the values of options and arguments by string. Like you need to have the argument or option object handy, and you pass that around as a key basically into the parser result like you're doing. Another question, and this relates directly to this verbosity, is the question in the chat. It would be nice if set handler just automatically add option. And there's an interesting, I think that's one of these cases that it could work, but there's certain cases in the API where it might not be the thing you want, because we have support for global options, and a global option you could add in your root command, say you want an option that applies no matter where you put it in the command line. We have support for this, but you might not actually want to then deliberately and manually add that option to every single command.
Right.
It might still work, but it's not necessarily. We have to sort of think that through.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean,
but something like that has been proposed, and it could work, and we're going to experiment with it a little bit.
Yeah, the other thing that this is, I guess, again, me just being.
Something I'm going to point out there. You mentioned this in the API review too, and it might not be apparent to people who are watching the stream. There's overloads for add. So you can just say add instead of add option, add argument. It's interesting. This is a little bit there's a reason for this, and it's a little different from the get value for option, get value for argument. But yeah, if you put run command.add instead of run command.add option.
Yeah, you can even do that, apparently.
You can do that. Yeah, exactly. And this is why those are there.
Yeah.
So if you want to, you can define the entire hierarchy like this, right? But you can't mix set handler into this particular style, and so.
Yeah, I can see that.
Two things. It's sort of you're going to sometimes have to explicitly add options and commands and arguments, and other times, if you're implicitly adding them through set handler, it might not be as clear from the code what the resulting structure is going to look like. So it might be just that this is in the space for, we just allow this base API to be pretty verbose and let these kind of more opinionated ergonomic layers express that more concise approach.
Yeah, there is this tension with the builder pattern, right? Like builders are nice if you don't need to refer to the intermediary things afterwards.
Yeah.
We had an internal API that we had 10 years ago, I think, that was based off of parsing things as ref. And you could do that, right? Yeah. You could have a builder where you basically allow to refer to local variable that, is the option, but then basically your definition would be here. But then I would pass in the ref to an option of T where the intermediary gets stored in. And that's actually quite nice in terms of if you don't need to refer to it, you don't have to. If you do want to refer to it, you can just add just overload basically the thing and then pass in the ref and then snapshot it this way. Yep. But I kind of like, I don't know, maybe I'm biased, but to me, like most of the time, my command line argument or my command line is not ginormous. Like I have let's say, five options total, right? Yep. So I would prefer if I could put the whole definition on one screen, just from a review standpoint, right? Yeah, I don't mind verbose. I think I just mind verbosity when it gets in the way of reviewing stuff, right? So for example, what I usually want to review is things like names, descriptions, right? I would like those to be kind of condensed in screen space. Yep. But then all the mechanics of how do they get in there? What do I set there? Like that to me is fine if that spans multiple pages. But in this style, it's a bit difficult because they are, this for example, I could just make this a method. I don't have to pass it inline, right? Which would help quite a bit with the readability here. But that's my own style of how I, knew up these options, right?
And there's a lot of different ways to do it. I've seen a lot of people as well just subclassing these, and this works perfectly fine. You could create a type that is force option, right? Or create a type that's property option, and then you could stick all those implementation details like custom parsing and aliases and just stick them into that class.
Yeah, totally. That would also be a very, sensible way of doing that. Another thing that I actually, I hate it and I like it. I like it because it is easily extensible by multiple parties is builders, right? Because anybody can provide an extension method over the builder. Yeah. So I could have a method like, add property option, right? And then this thing can new up the right things, set the right things and all of that. The problem with subclassing is that it gets in the way of many other things, right? So it only gets you so far sometimes.
Yep.
But the problem with builders very often is that they are not necessarily discoverable either. They have, once you start off of the builder, like discovering other things you can do with it is fine. Yep. But what I found is that if there's multiple different kinds of builders and then you have callbacks and stuff, it gets very quickly to, you need to really understand lambdas and how things compose and which order things are executed in order to make sense of your result. Which again, in ASP.NET, I think what really helps them is that it's very consistent and they have a very strong, file new project experience where they basically push you really hard down this path where they already give the builder to you and you just, inject some code here and there. But I think for general purpose APIs, I'm undecided. I would have to play with this a little bit to see whether we could have a command line builder that does all of this in some sensible way. But
we had that at one point. So we do have a command line builder, but the command line builder doesn't have methods for configuring the parser. It configures more sort of higher level things. Like here's one example, right? There's certain behaviors like the double dash behavior, right? Double dash is this whole kind of complex thing in POSIX command lines, where if you use a double dash like you did in .NET Run, right? Double dash, then everything after that is intended to be parsed as arguments, not options, or in the terms of the speclet about it is operands, right? Yeah. And .NET Run actually does something a little bit weird there. And so originally we had this based on .NET Run, and we actually have this legacy behavior where you can say, on the command line builder, you can say use legacy double dash behavior, which will give you the .NET Run behavior, right? Everything after that goes into this bucket of unparsed tokens in that case, and then it's up to you to decide what to do with them. But that's not actually quite what the POSIX convention is. In the POSIX convention, it can be used as an escaping mechanism. So say you actually literally want to pass the string, in your case, like dash out, right? As an argument.
Yep.
Right. You could put that after the double dash.
Right.
And that's the more common POSIX use case for double dash. And so if you want to change that behavior, you can go through our command line builder. If you want to customize help, because it cuts across all of your options and arguments, right? It's not necessarily like, say you want to show in help, you want to show a table output, right? We're not going to be able to represent that in our object model.
Right.
So the command line builder lets you insert custom help sections, reorder the help sections, things like that. It also has hooks for things like our completions. The completion story is a whole other piece of infrastructure here. But any application that's built with System Command Line automatically has support for shell completions for one set of shells, and that'll grow over time. But it's very generic because it's a really hard thing to build a completion provider for command line apps. So we wanted to generalize it.
And that's another thing that
things like this you can hook into with the command line builder. But you didn't have to think about it. You got it all for free.
Yeah. So one person in chat is asking effectively, why can we have a case where the option itself would have a kind of like a handler associated with it? But I guess my answer would be, in general, I wrote a parser before, which is kind of like the one that I mentioned that has this thing where you basically pass in things by ref, where because you pass in things by ref, the parsing has to happen effectively as you are constructing the command definition, which is problematic for cases where things have to be in a certain order in order for the parser to make sense. So in general, you want to basically say, you construct your parser, you call parse, and then you get an output back. And I think mixing these two things together very often results in problems. Now, in this case, when it's a callback, it's fine because the parser can just call it at the very end. But I think in general, like, it's bad to say, as you are parsing, the side effect of parsing is you're running the command. Right. Because if you want to do like things like shell completion, you kind of want to run the parser in order to like determine what the valid options are, or not the parser itself, but the definition of the parser, right? And in order to, but you don't want people to actually run the command because the command may have side effects like deleting all your files, for example, right? So you want to separate these two things out.
Yep. And then one of the, I don't know if this is implicit in that question. Only one handler is ever run. Sometimes people will say, they sort of have this intuition that if you have a root command and it's got a handler, and you've got a sub command and it's got a handler, that somehow those handlers will be called in sequence. But it's more like routing in ASP.NET. It's exactly and only one handler will be called. Yeah. And so options, they wouldn't have their own handler. They would have their, you can certainly do a lot with that custom parse delegate. Right. But it's not an invocation. Right. At the point of invocation of a command handler, you can think of a command as like or a verb as another term. You can kind of think of that as a placeholder for a method call, and options and arguments are parameters to that method call. And that's kind of the way we think about it. Yeah, I guess you could cheat here, right? I could totally use this thing here, capture a local variable, and then instead of doing return, I can just assign it, right? And then return it as well. Sure. And then yes, you can, but that's not the intent, right? The intent is that these things are, you're not supposed to mutate effectively state like that and pass it, around like that. But I think that, I would generally say, like, every time you have a parser, it might be appealing at first to do something concise, like, passing things by ref, but then as your thing grows in complexity, you very often regret that choice. We have enough RAM now that we can afford parsing and then doing things. We don't have to do the
old YAC style thing where parsing is kind of running the compiler already.
Mm-hmm.
So and it just generally results in like less weird errors, right? Where, oh yeah, because you did it in the you change your order in which you pass parameters, which is supposedly irrelevant, and it changes the behavior of the program. That's usually bad.
Yeah. And it's hard. People are used to writing these kind of very simplistic parsers in .NET where they do things like that. And it's, all these different edge cases and different grammars and whatnot become really hard to account for. Like you do need it's one of those problems where everyone thinks it's a simple problem, but it's actually, it gets more complex the more time you spend looking at it. And so it's better just for end users to be able to have a consistent experience of them not having to know what are the conventions of this tool's command line. It's better to have this kind of unified infrastructure for it.
No, it is surprisingly difficult. I mean, I wrote parsers for like fairly non-trivial languages, so I thought like, how hard can it be to write a command line parser? And it's surprisingly difficult because, first of all, it's actually very hard to find good, syntactic rules for, what are you doing? What are you supposed to do with quotes, right? Double quotes, escape quotes, like what are all the different ways quotes can be handled? And then, colons versus backslashes, space before, space after, right? There's a million ways things can go. And a lot of that parsing is also contextual. So it's actually not that easy to just write a parser, get back a DOM, and then, do something with it. You have to kind of know what things can be expected as you're parsing. And so, as you said, like really what ends up happening here logically is I define my grammar, right? And then we basically handle the composing of the parser for that. And
we didn't even, and on that topic, we didn't even talk about POSIX unbundling. I know this is a topic that's near and dear to your heart.
Oh yeah, that's the dash x the f thing for Git. Yeah, that's I guess for force. That's another one. Exclude, I guess. Exclude option. All this. Exclude, and then let's say dash x. Exclude something important. And then I guess we only have to add this somewhere here. Force option, exclude option. I have to think about what I'm doing here, I guess.
Are we still using the naming convention binder? I thought we
believe I do. Yeah, let's see what ends up happening. I guess I have to print it now if I want to actually do something useful with that.
Yeah, or you can use the parse directive. Directives are another thing that the command line builder that I was mentioning before, like a lot of directive-driven behaviors can be configured there. Because again, they're not specific to any command or option.
So I could say xf, and it should. Yeah, so it does specify. Basically, it's shorthand for -x-f. Yep. Yeah, like POSIX is weird. Like there's some stuff that I think is almost an insult, right? But I mean, like especially when you do things like, in Git, a very common thing people do is like to say git commit -am foo, right?
Yep.
And then logically that's equivalent to saying -s and then -m, and then this is the message that goes for this argument. So basically when you bundle, the last one can have an argument, but yeah, I don't know. I'm not. I mean, yeah. If we support POSIX options, or POSIX, I guess, conventions, we have to do it. But some stuff I find, and then also like things like this, right, where you can say git commit. This is a message, right? I mean, that's the way you want to parse it, but that's the way you're going to parse it. So
yeah, no, we support this because it's such a common POSIX convention, but
right,
it seems people kind of don't often react well to it when they see it for the first time.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm supportive of that in the sense that POSIX is basically the style for command lines that kind of won. Some people prefer slashes, but I think the problem with .NET, I think, and I said the same in the API review, right? We want to push people towards making it fairly easy to write cross-platform apps. So it makes sense to me that we make it very easy for people to just follow the POSIX conventions without even knowing that they have support for it.
Yeah. Well, and we also made it straightforward for people to alias things in a way that if you want to support both -p and /p, right? That's straightforward.
Yeah, it's straightforward in the sense that you basically say what the separator is, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And I think that, you can still, like, what happens if I do things like this, right? That's probably allowed, right? But it's probably not something that we would tell people is a good idea.
Well, PowerShell people would say you forgot to capitalize your F, but
yeah, they're wrong though. For POSIX conventions, I think this is one of those issues where the author of the tool has to be aware of what the conventions are, right? And if you just do that naively, like everything is working fine except that did something that is not recommended, I guess, for POSIX.
Well, we've had people file this bug where they had an option called -ABC.
Yep.
And it was unbundling for them.
Yep.
Like, what is going on here?
Yes.
Or the reverse, right? And we'll only unbundle it if it's valid once it's been unbundled.
Right.
So -ABC, otherwise -ABC will shadow the -A, -B, -C, and you won't be able to get to that by bundling.
Right.
But it's if people don't understand that convention, it's really confusing.
No, it is. I think this is also something that maybe an analyzer would be helpful, right? If you really wanted to tell people like don't do it, right? We could actually have an analyzer that says, you know what, this is not POSIX conventions, right? If you want to do this, fine, but just be aware that you're not doing what you're supposed to do.
That's interesting. So it's a pretty hard thing to do an analyzer for that because some of it depends on runtime behaviors, but maybe it's possible. But the thing that we do have that's actually worth pointing out, one of the in our quest for greater performance, we don't do a lot of runtime validation of the correctness of your parser, and this is kind of related, right? So if you were to create another option that also had an alias -f. Right? You have an ambiguity in your parser. We're not going to warn you about that at runtime, but we have a method that you can call to test your parser. Hopefully, we write tests. We have a method that you can call to do that validation in your tests, and you can call it at runtime if you want to, right? But ultimately, if it was valid when you compiled it, it's valid forever. And so, why ask users to pay that perf cost? So that was kind of the rationale for doing that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because you separate effectively the parsing from the execution. It wouldn't be super difficult for me to write this method in such a way that I can just call it for my test and only do the parsing and then basically get back something that I can look at and says like, were the things I expected to come back are the things that I expected to come back. No, that all makes sense to me. I think I'm honestly like, I'd be happy just calling this code here, quite frankly. But I can see, I think I understand the value of this now. This one I'm less gung-ho about, mostly because I know I don't trust myself. So I will rename one thing and then this thing magically no longer gets any inputs.
And that's why that's not the recommended approach and why we moved to the core library. But folks in the comments are pointing out, they would like to see something that was more concise. And so I think we've reached kind of, without that extra ergonomic layer on top of this, like the source generator or your doc-opt or attribute-driven approaches or whatever combination of things, this is about we're approaching the limit, I think, of how concise we can make this while still making the API as rich and flexible as it is. And so we think we want this like extra ergonomic layer on top of it. And like you pointed out in the API review, that tends to be more a matter of opinion and changing styles and changing tastes over time, right? And so I think we'll see things like that sort of come and go, and people will experiment with it and find things they like and things they don't like. But it may not be as timeless.
Yeah, it also depends on the app. So for example, what I find is like almost all my multi-command apps, I end up in a world where I already use the I in my app. And then what I usually do is I just say, oh, you derive from a command called iCommand or something. And then this iCommand has a method that, in my case right now takes mono options. And so you're basically pushing all the stuff in that you want to parse, and then you get called back. And then this way, I don't have to deal with a ginormously huge main. But I mean, I can see a world where somebody would say, you know what, in my case, I just want to have this, I command, and then, I command of T, where T is my options, right? And then I want some attributes on them. But this might be highly depending on the actual attributes you want to use. You may want to define yourself because they're very specific to your domain with extra validation, or like specific, T's here that are not in the BCL, right? This might be your own type, for example, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Or depend on some other things that you want to read from the environment, right? So I think that's okay to say if you write more complicated apps, you may have to write some infrastructure yourself, because it's just, a function of how concise you want it to be for your case, right? Because the other thing I see in the BCL, if you make it concise for us or for everybody, very often the end result is no longer concise, because then that's why I'm very supportive of saying the base layer should be simple and flexible, because then anything else can be built on top, and nobody has to do the heavy lifting again. Because I can probably build a command line builder by hand, only using the primitives I see here, but we wouldn't even have to ship one in the box. So this is super useful. I think I will switch my stuff over now. I'm actually quite happy with this. Anything else you want to plug?
Well, next time I will get you to use .NET Interactive for the demo. But,
Oh yeah.
The other thing that we didn't, there's a few major areas of functionality here that we didn't talk about, and I think command line completions is probably the most fun one. So if you want to just, if you want to do a 2-second demo of it, but not dig into what the source code is that empowers it, you could install .NET Interactive.
How do you do that?
.NET add package. Oh, sorry. .NET tool install. Dash G.
Yep.
Microsoft .NET dash interactive. Dash interactive.
Like this?
Yep. Oh yeah, there's a couple steps here at the end user. This is something we want to simplify, but you'll see more and more of these completions in the .NET CLI itself, and the .NET CLI is powered by System.CommandLine. There's a script you've got to install, and maybe I don't know how it'll take just a couple of minutes if you want to do it.
Yeah, totally.
Cool. Go to. Well, so actually, there's and just do the same thing you just did, except also install .NET Suggest. I don't know if it's Microsoft.NET. I think it's just .NET Suggest.
Oh, like without Microsoft?
Yeah.
Yep.
So now, if you run, I think it's .NET Suggest. Just run help on it. .NET. You can do it with a space in it here. That's just the .NET convention. But
yep. And it's register or something.
Don't worry about register. Okay. We're gonna improve the if you do .NET Suggest script PowerShell. All right, take this script and drop it into your PowerShell profile.
I guess this, and then I can probably do something like this, and then I put this at the very end or something.
Sure. Does that? Yeah.
Do I have to do it without the comments or with the comments?
Scroll up a little bit.
Oh, I see. Okay, I see. Okay, sure.
So what this is doing is it's hooking into the PowerShell specific completions. This is the API for PowerShell completions. Right. So save this, open a new terminal, and now you'll get.
Gotcha. I think I understand what's happening now. So if I do.
So this little dance for installation is a little bit more complex. We want to make this just the default. We just want this to just work.
So if I now do, I guess, console, and now I say dash, now I hit tab, something should happen.
I wonder if it will. There's a bunch of kind of order of operations install stuff here, and this might not work.
Oh, I probably have to restart my shell to begin with.
You do have to restart the shell, and then that might work. But there's a bug for order of operations for registration. So if you didn't already have,
Oh, I might already have one. It's, let's see.
yeah, try it. That's your JSON file.
No.
.NET Interactive should work. So that's why I had to install it, because it's one that I.
Oh, I see. So I just run .NET Interactive.
Put a dash in there. There's a bug that doesn't. This is only a problem for .NET ones, but yeah, do .NET Interactive space. Now hit tab.
Ooh.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, and you can kind of go through the whole API this way, and there's ways to provide custom completions. If you have things that are not really intrinsic to your parser, say you want to do .NET add package, and the .NET CL actually has support for this of querying NuGet for package names and things like that. The .NET add, so this is.
I guess that worked already.
Yeah, you might have already had that one installed. There's a slightly different mechanism that's still, for completions, we're still converging the two models, because .NET add had. So an early ancestor of System.CommandLine is the .NET CLI parser, which has now been replaced by actual System.CommandLine. But the completions handshake for the shim script in the .NET CLI still uses a different convention. So they require separate shell customizations.
Yeah, somebody has to write the code that goes to NuGet and fetches down the package IDs, for example, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's just like the add validators and things like this. You can do add completions. So I think is the API call, and you can add either a fixed list of completions or a delegate that goes and fetches them from somewhere and things like that.
Yeah, because obviously you don't want to register 250,000 completions just in case. You want to say, if somebody types new, you just want to say, okay, what else comes after that, right?
Yeah.
Yep, that makes sense.
So we've made it, this is really like a shell. Like when you write completions code for your System.CommandLine app, you don't have to think about the shell interaction at all. The end user has to do this installation dance, which we want to make easier, but you just will get completions for free on all these different shells. And right now it's PowerShell, Z Shell, Bash, and I think Fish is in PR or will be soon.
Yeah, the killer really is like, things like this, right? It's less about the syntax. I mean, that's also neat, but like it's really like if you do like things like git checkout, right? And then you say main and it completes the branch name, right? That's really the absolute sexy part, because that is the code that the customer is writing. And then effectively this is or I guess yeah, basically you would have to write the code that fetches the branches, but then we would basically do the heavy lifting to say, oh, if you invoke it from the command line, you hit tab, we figure out how to invoke your code, right?
Yeah.
No, that's cool. And I guess this is powered by if I go back here, if I would have to say something like out option add completions.
Yep.
And then I guess there's a fixed number of them, but then there's also you give me a completion context, which I guess would be like what the customer on the command line already typed, and then I can basically provide the remainder of that.
Yeah,
so I wouldn't have.
Yep, you can see the parse result. You can understand. I mean, this will be. This is a little bit like the that custom parse delegate, right? It only gets called if it makes sense in context. So if you attach this to the options, you're providing completions just for that option. You don't really need to worry about everything else that's on the command line.
Right.
So
I think for branch names, it's probably fine to fetch all and push them in. But like for things like package IDs, you don't want to go to NuGet.org and just download 250,000 IDs just in case, right? So you want to
so you can see that. Yeah, and you can see the token and say, if the API allows filtering at the other end, you can say, here's what the user typed. Just go get completions for just that, right?
Right.
And so this API it's fairly flexible, and you can do kind of more the static approach and the more dynamic approach.
I mean, this honestly, this is super cool. Like, I mean, this is something I would have to play with a bit more to get a sense, but like that, it's usually not worth it to just go through the entire dance of registering like a shell hook somewhere just to get completions for your one command line tool. But it totally makes sense to say, we do it for anything that uses System command line, because if most .NET apps are going down that path, then you have to do this thing once, and then you get completions for most command line tools now, and that's actually quite neat.
Yeah, that's one of the goals, is trying to make hard things that are improvements to end user experience, just kind of something that the developer building an app with this doesn't even have to think about.
Right. Yeah, and we could potentially even install it automatically, right? Because then if .NET itself goes, meaning the CLI.NET, DOT, NET goes through that mechanism, and if we're registering it as soon as we get on the box, then literally any other .NET command line tool would just work, right? You don't have to do anything for it.
Yeah, I think the question is where to put that. If it's in the SDK, that might reach most of the people who care about command line tools anyway.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like if you only have the .NET runtime, maybe, but that seems problematic.
Yeah. We don't have the global tool acquisition story for the .NET runtime alone as well. So these are all problems for Chet to go solve. We can just he'll deal with it, and we won't have to think about it.
So this was super cool. Oh yeah, Chet is also in chat. Okay, that's a bad way to put it, I guess. Overloading the term chat. Delete the signature block. That escalated quickly. All right, so I think I got all the answers that I wanted. Interact with chat as much as you probably should have, but that's a general problem when you're coding. I found it super useful. I think I have a much better opinion now, or not opinion, a much more informed opinion of System Command than I had before. I probably will switch my tools over to this and get a bit more sense of that. But then, what did we say? 2 weeks from now, whatever, we want to do the remainder of the API review.
Yeah, let's get something on the calendar before I go on vacation.
That's right. I need to check your calendar and then put something on.
Yeah. And now's the time to play with it and file bugs. If we're going to break APIs, let's break them. We've stabilized quite a bit. I think we're getting down to the point where I think we're going to move a few things around into different namespaces, and then the set handler thing needs to be sorted out.
Right.
But yeah, the more opinions we have, the better the decision will be that we make. So,
for sure. Alrighty, then I say thanks to you, and then thanks to everybody else who was listening in and watching the recording afterwards. I should be able to upload this stuff to YouTube if I can figure out how to get the video, which I think I should at least get from Twitch. Yeah, awesome.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks a lot.